Very boring bit here at the top. Listen, for the last decade nearly, I've been doing a way too early mock the day after the season ended. Now, baseball is very different now for many a reason. Primarily, we actually don't know what the draft order is. Like, we can talk about an assumed draft order, but for the first time ever, we are going to have a an MLB draft lottery. So we have the odds, we have a set. The general rule is I do a pick, I do a sleeper selection for each team, kind of looking at recent and overall history of the people in charge. And then on top of that, I then go through and only do the teams that have been eliminated. Hey, your team's still alive. Sorry, you don't get a pick. And then I will go back in after each round, kind of do another short video for each of those teams. Why am I doing it in video format? Because it's a multi-hour thing to write and research. And yeah, it's better when I do it that way. But, I almost had 3 selections this past year. I was very close. I had 3 players that actually lined up really well. And some people even mocked to go. But so far, my only success has been picking the Chicago White Sox. It's a little bit harder when they're picking 15th. But, it's a piece that is back when I was a writer, before I was a podcaster. It was probably one of my 3 most popular pieces all year. So without further ado, I'm just pulling up pulling up the draft finder over at Baseball Reference. And of course, right as I was getting ready to do this, the basement decided to get loud. But if you're here for data, you're here for fun. You are not necessarily here because you want high production value. If you wanted that, you'd be going to the Locked on Guardians podcast and not my personal account that I plan to do a little bit more with and slowly build out as just another fun thing for me to do. But let's get into it. So, best odds to pick first overall. Well, 3 teams. Nationals, A's, and Pirates. Each have a 16.5% chance to pick one. If we're going through with the Nationals here, the one thing I'll say about the draft at the top, I'm not a big fan of the prep side of it. If I'm going through, it's like I think I'm leaning college guys for the top 4 selections, maybe the top 5. And then from there, we can kind of debate a few other players. But yeah, I lean into the college one in this class. I am not as impressed with the prep group. It's certainly not as good as a year ago. That's going to drive me insane. It normally doesn't click on and off quite that much. But let's get into it. Let's assume the Nationals are picking one. Recent history with the Nationals, everyone knows that they'll take a guy who's got, I've always said the thing with the Washington Nationals, let me rephrase it, is they like guys whose stock gets dinged. It's almost hard to judge them because it feels like they will often grab the player whose stock was higher, before the season began. That's Elijah Green. There was, this time a year ago, people were arguing generational talent for him, and he fell to 5. Brady House, he was a 1-1 candidate, fell. Cade Cavalli, some people thought, and that pick looks like it's going to turn out well for them, that he could go in the top 12 to 15 selections, 20s. Jackson Rutledge, I was told was going top 10. Mason Denneberg hurt. Seth Romero had some off-the-field stuff, but you get my point. They love, so it's kind of hard to pick because you almost want to look at, and especially if they're picking one, you're not necessarily taking the guy whose stock has fallen. They have been prep heavy of late, but I don't think this is a class where you go prep. The question really, it feels like if you're picking one, you're taking Dylan Cruz, right? Like, that's just the way it goes. Listen, you can go back and find my way too early mock where I called him the best prep outfielder in his class before he delisted himself for that draft. I've been a believer for a long time. I think it is a 5-tool talent. I believe in it, and I think if you're picking one, I would be kind of shocked if you went any other position. If they did go prep, Max Clark seems to be the guy. Wasn't necessarily the best summer for him, but a lot of pure physical tools. So if we move into 2, just in terms of win-loss, that's the Oakland Athletics. So Oakland, obviously known for their Moneyball days, but hey, Tyler Soderstrom 2 years ago was a different selection for them, that is for sure. This year they took a sliding talent in their own right when they took the catcher from Arizona, Daniel Susac, who slid to them. It is interesting to look at the trade for Shea Langoliers. They drafted Tyler Soderstrom, who technically was a catcher when he was drafted recently. Susac was a catcher. I don't really see a catcher who's going in the top 10, though the other thing you see in this data is they haven't taken a pitcher since A.J. Puck. And that was the last time they took a pitcher. So we're probably looking at hitters going through. Part of me thinks that it could be a surprise pick. Like, my sleeper here would be Jacob Wilson, son of Jack Wilson, who is just that extreme advanced approach, rarely strikes out, good instincts. Like, there's a lot of what made Brooks Lee an interesting prospect this year there. But at the same time, they've also liked speed in the past, and they like offensive or up the middle talent, good athletic profiles. When I'm looking at who is on the board, I think if you're looking for the athletic profile, I would lean into Enrique Bradfield, who some at points have thought could be the top player in this class. You want him to get bigger, you want him to get stronger, but he gets on base. He is a plus runner. He does everything right. I think he fits what we have seen Oakland do multiple times in the past. Pirates are at 3. We have the front office in place there that took I love their approach in 2021 when they drafted Henry Davis and then used all that money to come back and get high ceiling prep talent. This past year, they went with the high ceiling prep talent just from the drop with Tamar Johnson. Then they came back to get Thomas Harrington from Campbell. Would they get another Campbell pitcher? Should that be the sleeper here? Would be Cade Keeler from Campbell. That's turning into quite the baseball factory. I think you put him there as the sleeper. I think, in general, though, if you're looking for the high ceiling talent, it's Max Clark. And again, maybe not the guy I would take, but I think he is, you're looking at 5-tool potential. Very good prospect. I don't want to make it sound like he is not a top tier prospect. He is probably, just because I believe in the college group so much, he's probably about 5th or 6th on my own personal board. But here at 3, I think there's a logic to it, a logic that matches up with what they've done. And yeah, they had a special situation to take Davis, but then after they took Davis, all they did was come back and line up high ceiling prep talent, and just they've gone for high ceiling talent in this rebuild. The Reds were interesting because they took the prep players early, and they had to give Collier a ton. By the way, they were 62-100. Last 100 loss team gets them the 4th best odds at that top pick. But then they went kind of college heavy after that and did not draft another high school player until the 11th round, went over slot. But they were, a team that definitely went prep, and then college. I think at this point in the draft, if you're picking 4 and you're the Reds, the other thing I want to point out is they've been very hitter heavy early. Chase Dollander is sitting right there, and he is probably, in most people's book, the number 2 player in this class. But I think for the Reds, because they've been so hitter heavy, Jacob Gonzalez, the Ole Miss star, who, if I'm being honest, is number 2 on my board, makes a lot of sense here. Just in terms of the profile, the approach at the plate, positional value, he just keeps getting stronger. And I'm a believer, and I think, again, just with what they've done, he could make an absolute ton of sense in this position. If you want a high school sleeper, that's the thing. Like, the high school bats really kind of slide off a bit. Maybe Walker Jenkins, the Canadian outfielder, who's a big athletic kid, but that's probably the sleeper there. I don't know, or not Canadian kid, North Carolina. Yeah, he played for Team USA. Had a complete brain fart when I saw Brunswick. Another guy, it's like maybe not the best summer, but the tools are there. So he's more the sleeper, I think, with this pick at this set point in time for me. Coming back around to, where's my list? Royals at 5, man. Oof. New GM, right? Well, I mean, Piccolo's there. If they let him stay in that position, it seems weird to fire the guy at top and keep the whole structure in place that's been very unsuccessful in spite of many high picks. That's just me. Like, I'm kind of like, I mean, it's not gone well on any level. Excuse me. Gavin Cross. It's been a lot of college players. I think, they still haven't hit on pitching yet. We'll have to see if, Asa Lacy can turn it around. It was a rough year for him. So much so, if I'm another organization, I might see if I can acquire him on the extreme cheap because his confidence has to be shot. And he's coming from a place that's just the worst when it comes to development. So, that being said, let's keep going for pitching. Chase Dolander is just too good to skip at this point. They still need pitching. He is there. He makes sense. If you want to go, Walker Jenkins is kind of the fallback sleeper for a team just because if you're not going college, going prep, he is the high ceiling prep player left. Tigers at 6. Getting a complete start over for that organization, but they also want to keep building and going forward. And I know the old front office love those SEC players, but Wyatt Langford would be the top player on my board at this point. I mean, just what he did last year, the power, the solid approach. He kind of did everything for Florida. He's not necessarily going to be, he's definitely not an up-the-middle player. He's probably a left field only. But just in terms of bats, it's looks like one of the better bats in next year's class and should be one that moves quickly, giving another, offensive power-hitting profile for that Tigers system. If you want to look a little further down, I kind of like the... I'm totally having a brain fart on again, because I just got done recording one podcast, jumping to the other. Kind of like Rhett Lauder from Wake Forest. I know he's an ACC pitcher, not an SEC pitcher. We've seen Wake do a good job of development, good command. I think that fastball is just going to keep adding velocity. I'm kind of betting on a leap from him, so just make him the sleeper there. Rangers at 7. They went with Kumar Rocker a year ago. Interesting selection, came back and got, in some people's eyes, the top prep pitcher in the entire class by using that savings. So if you look at it that way, then it balances out. Definitely a disappointing year when you were looking at what they did overall, just because, let's be honest, they were a team with playoff aspirations and they have the 7th best odds. When we're going through guys that stand out, who could make sense if they go the college route again, or if they want to go the prep route like they did the year before. And again, it's like this past year was honestly a year where it's like, did they go prep? Did they go college? Kind of both. Like Kumar Rocker was college, but they clearly chopped that money and split it evenly between a pair of pitchers, one being a prep and one being a college player. So it's a bit of a different take in that regard. It's kind of like they, looked for savings and went from there. Jack Leiter a year ago was obviously the big college money guy. Looking at the college class, would they look at Jacob Wilson, son of Jack Wilson, who I previously mentioned? He might be a good sleeper. We do have seen them go with bloodlines. Some absolutely obscene data at a small school, though. Rhett Lauder, the next Wake arm, could be interesting. I don't know. Tommy Choi, due to his Cape performance. Kyle Teal from Virginia is a guy I keep kind of waiting. He didn't have a great summer, but catchers always rise. If they want to chop their money, Brandon Sprout is another player that's highly interesting. Just going through the general list of names. Paul Skeens might be someone to consider here. So a little bit, I don't want to say off the radar. He's definitely a first-round guy, but a two-way player who believe was which of the he was an armed forces school previously. Was it our Air Force, Navy? I feel like it was at Air Force last year. So he's got great velocity. He has huge spin. Uh, Basically, you want to see him completely give up on being a two-way guy. Just focus on being a hitter. I don't think, or a pitcher. I don't think anyone really believes in the hitting. But see what he can be as a starter. Try to refine him. Because he's one of those guys, I don't think he's top 10 on any board right now. This is me just trying to make a shot on projection. Because with the secondary offerings, with the spin rate, with the velocity, focusing on a pitcher, I hope they focus primarily on pitching. I think he could be one of those guys who rises up, who really moves up forward very quickly in this class. Maybe not the most exciting one, but that's the other thing I'll say about this class. It's not the most exciting class compared to years past. It's definitely one that I feel like falls off a little bit. I mean, personally, it's like Tanner Witt, I think, was my top prep pitcher who ended up going to school, and he's not someone who has shown as much at Texas to really be that first rounder that, I mean, I argued for him out of high school to be. I guess Braden Taylor is the other one that people kind of like, who's the, master of nothing, able to do everything, master of none, skilled at everything type of guy. But let's take another long shot with Skeens and make the sleeper Braden Taylor from TCU. Next up on the list, too many tabs all at the same time. The Rockies at 68 and 94. That's actually, I think that's the opposite of Texas, right? Like, that's actually a surprisingly good year for a team that looked pretty poor and went out and spent money in free agency and got almost nothing for their big free agent addition. For a long time, they were one of the most conservative drafting teams. Then they went out and had Benny Montgomery and Zach Veen, and then last year they had 3 firsts and just went. They went, a little bit of risk with their college guys, but they went heavy into those college ranks. And if I'm just going through, it's like Gabriel Hughes. That was one of the safest pitchers. Sterling Thompson, draft eligible sophomore, big performer. Jordan Beck, tools over performance. So if you're looking at the college grouping, I think Jacob Wilson here, the shortstop from Grand Canyon. Listen, if they went with their top 10 overall pick, you want the safe college guy. It's Wilson. Doesn't strike out much. Son of big leaguer, solid defender, great approach. Checks all the boxes right there. I don't know who has the pitching, the correct pitches you need to succeed in Colorado. Before I would go and necessarily claim that anyone's that guy. It's kind of interesting because the pitching group in general is just, it's kind of like last year's. I don't feel like there's anyone overpowering after Dollander, and then it's just it's just kind of like 5 guys, pick the one you like. I feel like I'm going to cough. Let's go with Cade Kuehler from Campbell as the sleeper here. He's got good velocity, slider, cutter, which I think are successful pitches in Colorado. Campbell obviously is a program on the rise. The Marlins at 9. They are keeping everyone in place, so that's nice for those. It's also nice for us who can go and kind of look at what they have done and see their approach. Now, with the downside for them, it's like Max Meyer hurt, J.J. Bleday. It hasn't worked out. They traded Kevin Meisner. They traded Connor Scott. Joe Mack, Khalil Watson had his own set of issues. Jacob Berry, they went safe on safe a year ago. So who is your safest remaining player in this class? Who is the one, when I kind of go through and I'm like, who is the one I'm going to look at and be like, okay, this makes sense. I lean towards the standout from the Cape, shortstop from Stanford, Tommy Troy, right? Yes, Tommy Troy. It's the thing. I keep lists of all sorts of places. And we know that the Cape is an important thing for evaluation, the Wood Bat League, and sometimes for certain teams it seems they value it more than the full season of college data. Stanford is a good program. The history of success out of Stanford has not been as high, so that might be something that holds him back. But we're looking at shortstops. We're looking at who is produced. If it's not him, the sleeper is Braden Taylor. Again, does a bit of everything, but doesn't excel. Probably ends up at third base. I'm just not as sure that you look at the numbers he put up, they're solid. It's like, is that going to be enough for him to be a starter? So I go with, seeing that typically the guy from the Cape who has the best run ends up expanding on that, and expecting Hunter to end up going high. Angels are at 10. Rough year for the Angels. You could say that every year, right? I know, not very nice. But, yeah, the Angels, listen, Zach Neto has worked out very well for them. Bachman has had his injury issues, but that is a pair of college players back-to-back for them. I lean towards, someone who could be a quick-moving college type. You do think, Neto and Bachman were small school guys. So maybe there's something in that. If Wilson was still on the board, maybe he is the guy they consider. I don't know, this is where I kind of feel Braden Taylor, because he's in a lot of places like right around the top 10. Does everything well. Doesn't have anything that you sit back and go, okay, yeah, he's the dude at this. Which isn't necessarily the Angels type. Like you go, that was kind of Zach Neto to a degree, though. So a little bit. But I worry he's more a backup than a starter. He's done everything well. Just not sure there's anything there that he's going to excel at enough to be sure that he is a plus starter. Sleeper, listen, we still haven't really leaned into that high school group. Walter Jenkins, the outfielder, still being there makes it an interesting sleeper for any team that would consider selecting a high school player. Diamondbacks are at 11, and they're getting closer to contention. This is a team that has built up one of the best minors in all of baseball, has drafted exceptionally well, in my opinion, has done a great job of grabbing sliding high-end talent, and they just build. And even when it's like taking Drew Jones at 2 or Jordan Lawler at 6, that is a player who's going later than they probably should have, and getting them there. And they have gone mostly high school, and they have taken a lot of, high ceiling types, specifically like outfield bats. What could be interesting is, Walter Jenkins is someone who stands out there just in terms of like the physical tools. Blake Mitchell, the two-way catcher. I kind of like I debate too. I debate Thomas White and Travis Sakura. White is a big lefty, has the high spin, has the pitches. He's probably the more high ceiling player between the two. So I'll lean into that because they've gone more for ceiling. But he's certainly a guy who's popping. He's a guy I know not everywhere is he the top prep pitcher on the board, but just in terms of ceiling and what's going there, I think he's the top prep pitcher in this class. And the question is just how good do you think he is compared to some recent, high-end lefties we've seen in classes? But everything is there. It's not a long track record. He hasn't been seen a lot. There are some command control issues, but everything else you want in a starting pitching package is there with White. So I go with him. And if they decide to go for someone who's maybe a little bit closer to the big leagues, the last of the college guys I think that I'm kind of looking at in this range is the Boston College outfielder, if they're going to go for bat, Travis Honeyman. One thing is he's not necessarily like the high-end athlete they've gone for. He's more of the solid producer. If you want kind of, gosh, I don't even know who the high-end athlete from the college class would be when I'm really considering players through here. Yeah, I'll go with that. We'll have to see who pops. That's the thing too. We're also at the point where it's more like summer didn't do a lot for people, but we'll see when the season goes through who can make up some ground. Cubs at 12. Again, a team that feels like they overperformed expectations. They were, I think most people just expected them to throw in the towel, and instead they didn't trade Ian Happ. They did not trade Wilson Contreras. They just kept their internal building going. Cade Horton this year, Jordan Wicks a year ago, Ed Howard the year before that. So they have leaned into the college crew, and I think an interesting college pitcher at this point in the draft would be Hurston Waldrop, the right-handed pitcher out of Florida. Started out at Southern Miss, had one of the best Ks per 9 last year in all of college baseball. Good fastball, good slider. There is the reliever risk with him. He was a reliever. He's a really interesting player for Florida, a guy who's stepping forward. Let's make Tanner Witt the sleeper, just because, man, if he could stay healthy, maybe he could finally step up and be that guy that was the player that I gave that first-round grade to out of high school. Twins. So the Twins, just stood around a year ago and had a top 10 pick and then had, a top talent slide to them. It's a great situation to be in. And in the second round, they got arguably the best college pitcher in the class if he had been healthy. And they got a really, favorite sleeper amongst the shortstop group as well. And it was quite the draft class for them. They'll just take who's on the slide. So if I'm kind of looking at consensus rankings, if I'm pulling up, I think, who's still there, I believe, going through all of this, is the Walker Jenkins. So they're in an ideal position. Go get the prep player as prep talent slides, and he's just sitting there waiting for someone to grab him. So Twins, there you go. Sleeper for this selection. Production-wise, they do like production, so we'll say Travis Honeyman as a sleeper yet again to the Twins. Red Sox. Now we're kind of hitting that point of disappointment for teams, right? The Red Sox were supposed to be good, and they started out okay, and they slid. And someone like Nick York, who was their great success story, then wasn't. Had a bit of a rough year. I actually liked Mikey Romero, but I knew he was going to go in the top 30. I called it. If you look at that, though, that is last 3 high picks: shortstop, second baseman, high school. There is a type there that is for sure. Going through the high school group, I feel like the top high school shortstop is probably Kevin McGonigal from Pennsylvania, who is the typical up the middle, good contact rates type of player. Makes a lot of sense based on what we have seen Bloom do when he was previously part of Tampa and what he is doing in Boston. Advanced approach, solid defender, up the middle, decent athlete. It should be able to stick at a shortstop position, and then worst case moves to second base. Sleeper here, just in terms of let's give it the pitcher who's still on the board, Travis Skycora, the right-hand pitcher from Round Rock, Texas, kind of your classic big righty. Tampa liked to draft prep arms when Bloom was there, so if they don't want to go up the middle, there could be a logic in Sykora there. Chicago White Sox, the most conservative team until they weren't. Taking a massive pitcher from locally in Schultz, and then that's after Westcath and Thompson a year ago. They liked kids nearby, right? Montgomery was from Indiana, I want to say, and then you had the pitcher they drafted was from Illinois. So, yeah, those are just kind of fun, random stuff. So should we stick with that and give them Dylan Head, the outfielder from the area? He is a toolsy kid. This is what happens when I record 2 podcasts in a row. Take a deep breath. Stop trying to just shove your way through everything. He's a really good athlete. I don't know if I want to go so far as to say 5-tool type, Clemson commit, could be a top of the order. But again, local kid, maybe I'm making too much out of that. Maybe it's just one of those things I find to be kind of funny. But, this is kind of like his range. This is where we could see him going here, maybe a little bit later. I could also see Rhett Lauder, who I previously mentioned, as a sleeper for this selection if they decide to go more from the college pitching grouping, which we have seen them go to a few times in recent years. Giants at 16. Very conservative team, even though Kyle Harrison has actually been one of their most successful picks. They have kind of stuck more the route of college guys and proven college performers. Reggie Crawford, I guess not as much proven a year ago, but Will Bednar, Patrick Bailey. Crawford was he was a money saver that ended up not being as big of a money saver as I thought. Then they came back with Wisenhunt, which was interesting because that was 2 players in a row that we really didn't get to see much of, whose value had kind of taken a hit, but were much higher valued prospects earlier in the year. And then they didn't go for a lot of big names, so they just kind of stuck to this approach of solid performers. And they didn't take a high school player until the 14th round. So if we go back and just kind of look at a consensus board, and see that thing, Crawford, they drafted him as a 2-way. And then they went college pitcher after that. They have liked lefties. It's I don't know if there's really a college lefty I'm thinking is going to make a ton of sense here for them. Matt Shaw is my sleeper from Maryland. The Big Ten is almost like a small school program. It's definitely a lesser division. And I think it's kind of interesting to look at just, what he has done, how well he has excelled. So I make him more the sleeper. I'm going to go with a player I mentioned a few times that is probably one of the top players on the board at this point, which is Reed Lauder, the right-hand pitcher from Wake. Listen, they went pitcher a year ago. Part of me wants to lean bat. I just feel like unless you're looking at Travis Honeyman, which could make sense. It's just kind of Jake Hurley could make some sense here. There's a lot of guys who kind of slot around here logically. But let's go with Lauder, who I think is going to have a good year. We've seen a lot of Wake pitchers step up in their draft year. The Orioles. One of the most successful teams this year, even though they didn't make the postseason, right? That's how you definitely want to look at it if you were them. They did not spread it around last year. That was the thing. We all thought that they were going to go, and some people could not understand why they went with Halladay. Halladay is a little bit of a safer profile, and positional value is a thing. They gave him a lot of money. Then they came back with Dylan Beavers, and then Max Wagner and Jude Fabian, and they went after Halladay. They didn't take another high school player until the 11th round. They have been a very college-heavy team for the most part. When you're looking, again, at this college grouping here, if I'm going through and who are the guys who are going to perform at a high level, who might also have a little more ceiling, just in terms of their recent picks in the first round. Okay, so Halladay, Beavers, Colton Cowser, Heston Jerstad, Jordan Westberg, Adlai Rushman. A lot of college bats. So if you're handicapping this, you want to go college bat. And, as I'm just kind of going through listing and who's performed in the college bats and who is kind of a consensus player here, the consensus college players, it really feels like, in terms of bats, are probably Hurley and Honeyman. Maybe Morales from Miami if you want power. And if you look at Max Wagner, there's some overlap in those skill sets. they've kind of liked the athletic profile. I'm going to lean with Hurley just because I think he's got a better athletic profile than Honeyman here. And we'll make Honeyman the sleeper. Honeyman's probably the better hitter and better performer, but Hurley is the better athlete. And there's more questions, but there's more ceiling. And hey, I'm cruising. I'm almost done with this already. So I can now go work on my other podcast. The Brewers at 18. Brewers always march to the beat of their own drum. Let's be honest. Now, sometimes I often overlap with that. Like, I love Frelick and Adams. A few years ago, I talked about loving Eric Brown, who they took. I put a big spotlight on Jacob Misiorowski, one of the spin kings before last year's class, said he could be a potential late first rounder. Not Adams, Tyler Black. It's Tyler Adams. I don't know. But yeah, they've gone out and gone for performance, but they've also looked at kind of those advanced numbers. But so Eric Brown, some people hated the swing, but the stats were great and he hit at every level. Travis Honeyman is a very much a Brewers type of guy. I don't think any of the stats there or any of it stands out as like he's going to be, I shouldn't say stats, but I don't think anything stands out that like this is a physical specimen, but all he does is perform. And he has consistently performed, and that matters. So I think, when you're going and looking at stuff like that, I think this is a team that really matters to. Cade Keeler from Campbell will be my sleeper, I believe. I think he's been the sleeper a few times, just because they like small school players. They like guys who perform at pop. He could make sense there. So there we go. No ad reads, nothing to do normally. Quick 37-minute 18-pick mock, just looking at lists, discussing history, and going over it very quickly. So I can reference it later. But if you like it, drop a subscribe. I know it's not the fanciest, but it'll be here for fun information off the cuff. Like I said, I created this account a long time ago, but it's going to be overruns on baseball like this. It's going to be maybe some video game chatter, depending on how if people want that. Maybe some movie talk, things like that. It's going to be a lot more of just my interests and less of a well-honed production. Thank you for watching.